All right, hang on, everybody. I made a little boo-boo here. Just getting, I'm kind of jumping ahead of the game. I'm trying to do a bunch of things at once. So just give me 1/2 a second here, and I should have everything on board. So hope everybody had a great Christmas. Good evening, everybody. I'm meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Boxing Day, 2018, where the Great Plains right now is having their version of a Boxing Day snowstorm, and we're going to talk about that tonight. I want to welcome my folks from a couple of different sources. We have the folks from SNS Storm Chase and Forecast Team for South Central Pennsylvania and North Central Maryland and surrounding areas. Good evening to you. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas and enjoying the day after Christmas as well. Also from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut Storm Watch page. Angry Ben's Angry Weather. These two pages generally focus on weather in the New York City metropolitan area and, of course, the surrounding areas. And, of course, the folks from my weather page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi, and those of you that may be watching from my Google app, which is free, and you can download it and enjoy it if you're in the New York City, Long Island, Connecticut, Hudson Valley, and New York City, Long Island, Connecticut, Hudson Valley, and Northern New Jersey. This app will work for you. And I'll put up the link to it. Otherwise, you just go to Google Play and search Joe Cioffi, and it will come up. So a whole lot of stuff going on because we've got this big storm that is going to be bringing a foot plus snows to many areas in the northern and parts of the central plains. That is also going to translate into a soaking rain and some flood potential for the Gulf states and for the parts of the East Coast. We're already seeing flood watches going up there. We've got severe weather tonight. We have tornado watches and severe thunderstorm watches up over parts of Texas. So this is a fairly important weather event. We're going to look back at the 2010 Boxing Day snowstorm that brought 1 to 2 feet of snow for much of my area and also brought snows down pretty far south, even snow as far south as Atlanta, Georgia, from what I remember, getting into the game. And we're going to look at the long range because the long range offers some possibilities for later Sunday night into Monday, and a lot of confusion. And we also have, let there be light, and there was light. And we also are going to look at the long range because the stratosphere is in absolute turmoil, and we're going to try to figure out what the implications of that. And we are going to bring Joe Rao on as he bursts onto the scene. He's going to join us tonight, and we're going to talk about the past weather. Joe, the anniversary of the Boxing Day snowstorm, and guess what?
I call it the Bloomberg Blizzard, actually.
Oh, you do?
This is the storm. This is the storm that presumably Mayor Bloomberg of New York was in Bermuda.
Yes.
And when he came back, he absolutely and flatly refused to believe that the storm event was of any great concern. In fact, I think he told people, "Why don't you go out on the town, go to Broadway, see a play, see a show, whatever." Meanwhile, there's like 1.5 to 2 feet of snow on the ground, and there were parts of the tri-state New York area, parts of New York City. It was reminiscent of what happened to Mayor Lindsay in 1969. Parts of the city remained unplowed for many days, a week or something?
Yep. Well, Mr. Bloomberg has a tendency to advise people to go out and eat a sandwich because that's what he told people the weekend going into Hurricane Sandy.
Yes.
And then if you remember, he threw all the weather people on the bus because apparently we changed our forecast.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I actually, Joe, thanks to the interactive tool from WPC, I actually went and brought up the maps going back to Christmas night. So this is at 7 o'clock on Christmas Day, 2010. And as I remember the Boxing Day storm, in terms of its evolution on the models, and it seems to happen with these major snow events. Hold on, I'm trying something. No, I brought my phone in so I can follow the chat going along. So guys, I can see you all here, and I don't have to maneuver maps at the same time. I just had to turn the volume down.
For a few seconds, it sounded like some of those radio talk shows where the caller, didn't turn off the radio.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it was. But Joe, I don't know if you remember this, and I think it was this storm. Going into this, the computer models do what they always do with big storms at the East Coast. At some point inside 72 hours of the event, they pull it.
They
and if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
It was the GFS in particular. I don't know if the other models did. I don't remember. The GFS just pulled it. It was gone. It actually, what it did was it just kind of changed its emphasis on. There was several short waves in that southern stream moving across, and it basically picked the wrong one.
Right.
And then it settled on the right one, which I think that the other models, I think the European had a better handle on it, if I remember correctly. And this is the outcome here. We got the surface map from December 25th, and I'll just move it forward, and we can watch the low just move across Florida, off the southeast coast. And we had this very cold high from west of Lake Superior down into Iowa, just sort of bananaed itself around it. And the low, with the energy so strong aloft, just intensified like an animal and slowed down to a crawl. This was on 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Boxing Day in 2010, and it was snowing like crazy. I think I got about 20 inches out of it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And this was some of the bigger amounts were in the central New Jersey, back down toward Philadelphia into southeast PA.
Right.
With the Boxing Day storm, and into south central PA. But this was really a one for one that sticks in the memory of a lot of folks.
And the Daily News, by the way, I remember distinctly that Sunday, the headline on the front page was alerting people that we were in for something like 16 or 18 inches of snow. So it was not like it was a surprise. It was anticipated, but
except to the mayor.
Exactly. He actually said in the aftermath, somebody asked him, I remember this so distinctly, a reporter asked him, he said, would you have declared a snow emergency? He said, no, I wouldn't.
Well, the other thing that I remember about it was because it was the day after Christmas, a lot of people had off.
Right.
And it was Christmas being on a Sunday. Christmas was on Saturday. So a lot of folks got the Monday off, like the federal holiday might have been the Monday. I'm not quite sure how it worked, but I'm sure people creatively constructed, a lot of people just constructed 3 and 4 day weekends. So
Right.
there wasn't, from the standpoint of a normal commute, a normal, school day, work day, it wasn't quite like that. So perhaps the road impacts would have been worse had this come, say, in January when everybody went back to work and back to school.
Oh, no question about it. There were fewer people on the roadways. In fact, nobody was on the roadway by, I would hope, late Sunday or Sunday night of the 26th, because it was just absolutely snowing to beat the banjo. I remember at my house, we picked up something like 3 or 4 inches in 1 hour.
We do that on Long Island all the time,
Little
by the way,
America.
just so you know.
Yeah, little America.
It's amazing when you look at this. Just looking at the maps here, and then we're going to go move on to the next. Whoops, what did I do? Well, I switched to the current map, so we might as well get on with this. All right, so here's our storm right now that is coming out of West Texas and in New Mexico. It has already spread precip all the way up. The actual Arctic boundary is sitting across South Dakota and southern Minnesota, because it's been from there north so far that we've seen snow. It's mostly rain, even though temperatures are in the 30s. There's a lot of heavy rain going on through parts of Nebraska and into western parts of Iowa, northwestern Missouri, and then, of course, down in the warm sector in through Texas, with dew points and temperatures both in the mid-60s, ripe for severe weather, which is what the Storm Prediction Center is doing. And I've got the Nowcast map view here, so you can see the large area of winter storm and now blizzard warnings up for parts of central South Dakota into northeastern South Dakota, area in south central North Dakota, winter storm warnings throughout central and northern Minnesota, northwestern Wisconsin. The warnings go back down through Nebraska into west Kansas, eastern Colorado. And meanwhile, starting to set up for us You've got that warm sector, tornado watch, severe thunderstorm watch. We've got a number of severe thunderstorm warnings. Very, very busy here. And the flood watches are going up already from Louisiana on up into Western Virginia. Johnny Quest, are you paying attention here? You know, this watch may be for you, or getting close to being for you.
No, this, as an old beer commercial, this flood's for you.
Yes, exactly. Hang on one second. Let me just see if I can get this chat going, so I can see.
It's tough now, man.
Oh, this
technology now. We've got a desktop computer. Now we're using also an iPhone or smartphone.
I put my smartphone in here because I figured I could get the chat on a side screen, and I had it, and of course now it's disappeared on me. This is so unfair. All right, you know what? I'll deal with it another time.
Yeah.
Okay, so we also have wind advisories up too, and in the Northeast, looks like some proactive winter weather advisories for upstate New York, well north of us, and on up into Vermont. There's going to maybe be a little bit of frozen and freezing precipitation at the start in those
differs a little
areas.
bit from last Thursday, Friday, in the sense that last week, we hardly had anything in terms of any kind of winter advisories ahead of the storm here in the Northeast. At least this is a broad swath now across, from the Capital District of Albany up to the Adirondacks, and a good hunk of Vermont, too.
Well, there's a little bit of cold air that's settling into New England and over
Right.
us tonight and tomorrow.
Right.
We're going to have a tough time tomorrow with temperatures until the warm front gets close. So there is slightly cold. There is some cold air this time around up in central and northern New England. But even there, they're going to wind up seeing a change over to rain at some point.
Locally, it'll be probably near or low 40s tomorrow. As soon as the sun goes down, the temperatures will plummet back to the mid or even lower 30s in some spots. And you say to yourself, okay, now here comes the storm, here comes some snow or ice. But it looks like before that has a chance to gain a foothold, temperatures are going to start rising tomorrow night, well above freezing by midnight in many areas tomorrow night. And then comes the rain after midnight and carries over into Friday, and temperatures on Friday could very well be into the 50s. And so here we go again.
Right. I got the chat back up on my phone, Joe, so I can see this. We're going to talk about the polar vortex and the upper atmosphere toward the end when we get into the long range. So be patient, okay? And I'm just trying to see if there's any other points here. Yes, Steve Lapointe, that is correct. A blizzard, over the years, the word blizzard, at least for us in our area, has come to be equated to a big, heavy snowstorm of a foot or more. It really is not that. You can have a blizzard with an inch of snow. You actually can have a blizzard with no snow falling down. It's about visibility and it's about wind. So if you've got blowing snow with zero visibility or visibility less than a quarter of a mile for 3 hours or more, that is technically a blizzard. It's a visibility and wind condition, and not necessarily a heavy snow that is coming down.
I remember once encountering on the Taconic what we would call a ground blizzard. This was in the wake of the 2005 storm, which at that time broke the New York City record for snow in 24-hour period. It was on a Sunday. The sun was out, actually. And all of a sudden, a big gust of 30 or 40 mile per hour wind combined with snow that was accumulated on the side of the road. Suddenly, I had like near whiteout conditions. It was what we call a ground blizzard. And again, as you pointed out, Joe, snow wasn't even falling, but again, the snow that was in the air, the blowing snow, was enough to create, for a short interval of time for me, near zero visibility. It was amazing.
This is the Weather Service's snow forecast. I got the wide view of the map up. A relatively large area of a foot plus is going to result out of this. You're getting some heavy snows, by the way, down through much of New Mexico out of this, and in through the southern parts of Colorado. You're seeing some snows also up through the Rockies. But this is where the big winners are going to be from this storm, or we want to call them winners, for the snow lovers anyway.
Right.
It starts out as a narrow band, and it kind of expands out in the shape of a V, with 6 to 12 and 12 or more running through central Nebraska on up into South Dakota, eastern South Dakota, southeastern North Dakota, a good chunk of central Minnesota on up toward the lake shores there near Duluth. And anytime you have big snows, you have a snowstorm that sets up in this general area, it's a pretty good bet, Joe, that for us, we're going to warm up and rain.
The northeastern part of South Dakota? Yeah, South
Yes.
Dakota. That pink, that deep shade of pink, is probably where the max snow amount is.
Maybe 20
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
red.
I mean, you got winds blowing like 30, 40 miles an hour. That's not good.
No, not at all. Look at that squall line in Texas where we have the severe weather that's arced in that bow shape. So
Right.
there's some pretty strong storms in there. If you're watching this on a replay later on, let me just remind you that we are, this is at 7:21 Eastern Time. So if you're seeing the radar, you are looking at one that obviously is dated. So please be sure to check your latest radar and any watches and warnings that are still in effect or perhaps may wind up being in effect for your particular area by going to weather.gov and then going to your local National Weather Service forecast office. All right, so there's our big range beginning to develop. We're already seeing all that Gulf moisture expand out there through Louisiana and Texas, so we know what's coming our way. You've got rain up into southern Nebraska, and then there was some lead snow that is running through South Dakota, northeastern South Dakota, part North Dakota, and into Minnesota. And there's only going to be more of this going forward.
I'm sure the folks who are, in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, are those who do not want to see any snow, maybe breathing a sigh of relief that they don't have to deal with all this mayhem that's going to be taking place just a couple of states away to the east. The Dakota's really going to get hammered out of this. So will Minnesota. I might point out that the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, will not be spared. They, however, will be on the lighter side of things. I think, Joe, they'll probably get he says, only about a half a foot of the white stuff, whereas places like Duluth and places that are further to the north and to the west are really going to get hammered with wind and snow out of all of this.
All right, so let's jump to the GFS. We'll take care of this storm system. Because for us, it's a rain event, and this is going to be for starting in the early morning hours on Friday, probably done by Friday evening. It'll be 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Maybe some places will get a little bit more, some places a little bit less. The usual suspect areas will flood. We're pretty much on board with this.
Right.
Your low comes out of North Texas, runs through Kansas. You can see that heavy snow on the GFS and how it spreads up through a second burst of it now as the low moves northeastward. The gradient gets very tight. You have Arctic air, or at least very cold Canadian air, dropping down from Canada that's sort of pressing in on the northwest side of this. And the low center goes pretty far to the left, so left of the East Coast. And the low center going up over northern Michigan and on up into southeastern Canada. So this is where we'll get some of the heavier rains. You can see the GFS is actually showing a pretty sizable area of heavy rain running from eastern Tennessee through central New Jersey by Friday afternoon, and then it'll start to pull away late in the day into Friday evening. Maybe somebody gets a little lightning and thunder out of this too.
Perhaps.
All right, so I'm going to jump over to the parallel GFS because this is where all the controversy lies.
Suddenly now the parallel, it was difficult enough to deal with the regular GFS. Now we have its evil twin brother.
Right, which will kill off the other GFS in a few weeks. It is going to become the operational. So I've been trying to use it more and more, Joe. So this way, I really to figure out what kind of errors that it has. I haven't really. There's been a number of different things that have gone in different directions in different events. It was pretty good with that mid-November event. It's fallen short since then on a few other things, so I'm just kind of trying to get comfortable with it, I
Well, it's going to be
guess.
interesting to see because as of this afternoon's the 12Z, the primary 12Z runs, the only other computer guidance model that seems to be dancing lockstep with the parallel GFS is the German Icon model, because if you look at the regular GFS, if you look at the global Canadian model,
Well,
for goodness sake,
No,
if you
we're really grasping at straws.
well, if you
Well,
look
right,
at the European model, and the European the last couple of days was saying, yeah, there's going to be some snow in the air on Sunday. Now all of a sudden this afternoon they kind of pull everything back. And
Well, I've got some model differences that to illustrate here in a second, so we could take a look at it specifically. So, we get rid of this system completely, and now what happens is the bottom part of this stalls out. You have a stalled frontal boundary in the Gulf states. There's some energy that is coming out of the plains and across the Ohio Valley, and the problem is every model deals with this differently. And I'll illustrate that on the upper air in a second. But I went back to the 12Z GFS because this has been very consistent, by the way. It's been like this for about 5 or 6 runs where it's been developing a wave that pushes northeast, a fairly solid area of moisture. But it also has this cold high up in northern New England that holds on, at least on the 12Z run. It held on enough where cold air gets sort of trapped down. And this is where we had snow for much of Pennsylvania, across northern half of New Jersey, Long Island, New York City, southern New England, and then the low moves away, starts to intensify a little bit as it moves to the east. I mean, this would be, if this verified, I think this would be like a 2 to 4, 3 to 6 inch snowfall for somebody.
Right.
We're not forecasting that. But I want to just show everybody the differences here. This was, the 12 off the 12Z GFS. This was for Sunday morning. You've got that cold high to the north. You have the wave coming out and that high trying to hold in. And we had that issue in the November system where the high held on for a couple of extra hours, which made all the difference in the world in terms of accumulation. But here's Joe. Here's the upper air on the parallel GFS. You've got this actually fairly strong shortwave, and what the parallel GFS does with this shortwave is that it not only holds it together, but it actually amplifies it as it moves eastward. And as a result, you have this rather amped up look, which is what we saw. The European has a much weaker shortwave here, and I noticed on the European maps that it did give a little bit of precip here for, when I say here, northeastern Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, Long Island, southern New England, Hudson Valley, on the order of a coating to an inch or so. It just kind of moved that little shortwave along, didn't really do anything with it, just kept it pretty flat because there's this upper high that's sitting near Cuba that's trying to build at the same time. And then you have the regular, this is how the parallel looked, but here's the regular, I had the regular GFS. Where is it? Oh, this is all polar vortex. For those of you thinking I'm not going to do the polar vortex, I am going to do the polar vortex. So
I want to see how many tabs this man has.
I have them all open. So let me switch to the regular GFS. That's the GFS for Sunday night. It's got no short wave at all. And in fact, it leaves all the energy behind in the plains, and it brings it out for January 1st, 2nd, where we wind up with hooking up with the Arctic front, and we get mostly rain until cold air comes in behind it.
Right.
So there's who knows which model is really handling this right? I don't know. I don't have a good feel. I see the parallel being consistent. In its world, I see the regular GFS being consistent in its world.
The European is not so consistent. I mean, as of yesterday or the day before, you would have said, well, yeah, there's a possibility that on Sunday we'd get some accumulation, but today it just, as you just said, it took a lot of away from that shortwave out over the Midwest and flattened the whole upper air feature over the Northeast out. And sent that system flying off to our south as well. So.
All right. So this is the big forecast dilemma for Sunday. I put it in the forecast for Sunday. I have a chance of snow or rain for my areas.
Well, I put sunshine, a cloud or two, but I also put a question mark. And for years, all of you who have been following me. On that other news gathering outlet, and now I'm not there, but for all of those years, And now here at FiOS 1, when I put a big question mark on any particular box in the northeastern United States, you see there's a lot of uncertainty there.
Yeah, and I'm also a big fan of using question marks when I'm not sure. I'm not sure, and it doesn't do you any good to try to be, at least for me. If I don't know, if I have doubts, you tell everybody you got doubts. And right now I have uncertainty when I look at a model that's got this big ridge that it tries to pop up, and none of the other models have it. So what do you do?
Well, you wait for the next run, which is what we've been saying since we got started in this business.
Right.
40-some
We
odd
always
years
wait
ago.
for the next run.
We always wait for the next run.
It's like the I Love Lucy meeting of the Wednesday Afternoon Fine Arts League, or as it is more commonly known as the Wednesday Afternoon Fang and Claw Society. It takes you 3 days to get ready for it, 3 days to get over it, and the house is a mess while they're here. All right, so now we took care of the short range, the not so short range. Now let's look at the long range, where everybody is, there's so much chatter. Everybody now is getting into this, the stratosphere and what's going on. And I'm going to get to that in a second because I want to look at the new parallel GFS with this upper air. As a night again, here's the trough wants to keep, at least for now, as we undergo some kind of transition. You do have another trough that tries to form out in the west, but it's a progressive trough. The ridge on the parallel is not overly strong. This would at least argue for maybe another chance of precip, perhaps around New Year's Day or shortly after. And then, if you believe this, we're going to get shots of cold air with troughing in the east, and it kind of stays there. So it looks like we're going to get shot after shot of cold air. That's a very cold pattern that eventually develops over the first 10 days of January, and I think that's where we're going here. Right. So, the snow weenies who have already proclaimed the winter is over. Look, I'm going to tell you right now, cold and snow don't necessarily go together. So for the snow lovers, you can have all the cold air in the world. If you've got the troughs are not in the right place, if you've got the cold air coming in and it pulls out just before the next cold air mass comes in, and you get some rain in between, that's something you can't tell in the long range. You can only look at the sort of general pattern. The general pattern that we're evolving into is going to be cold. But, to proclaim, apparently a lot of folks have, long range foresight on the order of super psychic ability, because they know that the weather from now until the middle of March is pretty much a done deal. Well, which is silly.
It is silly. Yeah, and again, if you are a snow lover, as Joe said, sometimes even though you have the cold air, if you have too much cold air, a lot of the potential storms could actually end up going out underneath you and out to sea. We saw a lot of that happen during the winter of 72, 73, where New York City Central Park only had 2.8 inches for the whole winter. So sometimes the cold air is not necessarily your friend. I am impressed, Joe, by the fact that look out in the western part of North America. That ridge just builds all the way up through the polar areas of western Canada. And so long as the ridge is in that position, you have to have the sliding pond effect, the cold air sliding on down from there into the Midwest and across into the eastern United States. It looks like that's what the long-range models are kind of suggesting for at least the first 15 days of January.
It also seems, I want to bring up the teleconnections. They'll do that at the end. So everybody is wanting to know about the whole polar vortex thing. So let me get through these maps and let's discuss. So what I've done is, for those of you, if you go on Tropical Tidbits, if you pull up this, you have to go to the hemispheric region. It's the only region that you're going to find the 10 millibar level. Okay. And you click on that. If you go to Upper Dynamics, you click on the 10 millibar level, and you're going to pull up the map of the basically the stratosphere. The area. This is where planes fly, and they fly here because the air is relatively stable up in the stratosphere, because temperatures rise with height. So as opposed to the bottom part of the atmosphere. So you have a stable atmosphere. You don't have a lot of turbulence or very little turbulence to worry about. So when you go up to that level, you've got, Joe, basically two features usually. You have a big upper low and a big upper high. And the upper low that is centered over the North Pole, this is what we would, is referred to as the polar vortex. And we've been talking about the fact that there's this record warming. Apparently, this is the warmest stratospheric warming event that's been observed since NASA's been following this stuff
late
since
70s.
Late 70s.
Yeah.
So, when you have a polar vortex that's wrapped up like a tight ball, basically all the cold air is locked up in the Arctic regions, and we're seeing that to some degree now. Although, if you look at this, and this was the map for the 23rd. This was on Sunday. If you follow the flow clockwise around the low and counterclockwise around the high is sitting south of Alaska. You can envision if cold air masses are traveling in that flow, that there's some cold air bleed down that is going into the northern plains right now, and that's feeding into this storm that is developing there in the plains. Now, what's going to happen is that warm air is going to basically attack the polar vortex, weaken it, and in this particular instance, because the warming is so significant, the polar vortex, this is based on today's GFS run, and it has support by the GFS ensembles, the Canadian ensembles, the European ensembles, even some of the climate models are doing this. It's that upper high literally splits the polar vortex in two. This is the map now for January the 5th, all right? And you've got part of the polar vortex that goes back up toward northern Europe and into Siberia, but part of it drops down into eastern Canada and over the northeast. And if you see that arrow, how I drew it, Joe, this would imply that have some cross-polar flow. But the way it's set up, if I'm reading this, and I reached out to some folks that know this stuff far better than I do, it would seem to me that this, in some ways, goes back to what we had last March when we had the split, where the polar source is actually coming more from the northeast. So this, to me, implies that we might have some longer range blocking to deal with along with the polar connection. Okay. So this I think could make things pretty interesting. Give it a little bit of lag time. It's going to, pattern changes are not
happen instantaneously.
They're not exactly. They're not events. They're processes. They take sometimes a couple of weeks to play out in their entirety. You can see that the GFS in its 2 week, when we ran that upper air, folks, when we ran it through, that was a 2 week time frame that it evolves into. We're starting to see that pattern change process getting underway now. It's probably going to play itself out by the time we get to maybe January 9th or 10th. But even in that interim, there might be opportunities along the way. We'll see. But this is going to be, I find this very exciting, actually, because honestly, it's only in the last couple of years that I've really sort of started looking at this stuff up there. And it's to see something like this. And Dr. Judah Cohen has been tweeting constantly about this, emphasizing that this is a really big deal that's going on.
Well, the Capitol Weather Gang in the Washington Post, they say that they're agreeing with you, Joe. They're talking about stratospheric warming. They're talking about unseasonably cold weather attacking central and eastern North America during the first half of the month of January, and they too are very, very excited about the prospect of maybe getting into a real wintry type weather pattern as we move into the month of January. So all of this is setting up, and we shall see whether or not we indeed see a sudden change to colder conditions. I can tell you that the last experimental 3 to 4 week weather prog from the folks at the Climate Prediction Center, we're also going for a change toward colder weather in the eastern United States during the first half of January. But one interesting thing, they also kind of suppress the moisture, above normal precipitation is kind of nudged down to the mid-Atlantic and southeastern states, which maybe is suggestive that they're thinking that, yeah, it's going to get cold, but maybe that moisture, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, might get nudged far south, and maybe those snow lovers up here in the Northeast may get disappointed, whereas the people who are not so snow lovers, places like Vermont, they love snow up in Vermont, places like Maryland and Virginia, and even as we have seen recently, the Carolinas, they may get another shot of significant snow in the month of January. We'll see.
You know, and that, Joe, I think is the big unknown here. We don't know what the surface implications of all of this are going to be. Is it going to be, you know, as we said a little earlier, we could have all this happening, and it could just wind up being, you know, depending, you know, for our area, for example, for the area that Joe and I are in, eastern PA, southern New England, and everybody in between. We could wind up going into a stretch of, you know, cold and dry, weak events that go by, no major storms. The major storms might wind up being further south. Or if blocking gets involved, we could wind up with something along the way that's far more important. We don't know that. That's the thing. Oh, now this is dandy. All right, hang on, folks. I got to show you this. I just went. I wanted to pull up the teleconnections. All right, are you ready for this, everybody? Hang on. You're gonna love this. Oh, where did it go? Here we go. I went to pull up the teleconnections this morning, and I couldn't get to the site, and I was wondering why. And now now we're reminded. Government shutdown, and I guess the long-range folks are considered non-essential. So you know what? They're non-essential. So if you're looking for teleconnections, at least from the standpoint of what's on the GFS ensembles, we're not going to get them. And for that matter, neither are the Weather Service forecasters that are considered essential.
May I say, I think you hit a wall.
Yes, I did.
Literally and figuratively.
I
right?
did. That is so hilarious. It never occurred to me. I'm punching this up this morning, and I'm getting a search page, and I'm like, that's odd. It's not going directly to it. I have it bookmarked. And now we know why. There is the government shutdown. We've lost the teleconnections, folks. What are we going to do without them?
What did the boxing promoter Don King once say? Only in America.
Yes, Bobby Livingsworth. You saw the teleconnections this morning. Which ones? Because if you saw anything, yesterday's were there. As I remember, yesterday's were there, but that was the last one. There's none today because of the government shutdown.
There may be a way of getting around this by some websites somehow or other get that information onto their websites. I remember during the last shutdown, I was unable to get certain
any ideas?
Guidance data or whatever. No
ideas.
The only thing I could suggest is go on Google and type in teleconnections or maps or graphics and see if somebody else has them or has access to them.
Howard, I did see your question, and I'm glad I answered it. I also saw your question about my prime rib and my lobster tails, which I did for Christmas Eve and the eve of Christmas Eve. Those came out insanely terrific. Okay, so if you need the recipe, let me know, and I'll tell you how to cook them. Bake them in the oven at 400. Don't steam them.
Okay.
Or boil them. That's the secret.
You're talking to somebody who could burn water.
I know you could burn water. Okay, so we've got a number of folks like Jess Harden. They're down south. The southern snow lovers. They may be in some areas of the south have one or two opportunities for snow in a given winter. Sometimes they could go several years or more without an opportunity for snow. So he's asking about, he's in Alabama and whether the cold air would make it that far south. Judging from that quick look that we saw of the parallel GFS, that trough extends pretty far south. Right. I would say, yeah, you probably will get that cold air to come pretty far to the south.
Absolutely. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, in what the Climate Prediction Center is alluding to, seemingly, they're saying it's going to get cold in early January, but they're also saying that perhaps the moisture field may be shunted a bit south because of the push of that cold air, pushing that moisture further southward. So that might imply that places that don't normally get or see a lot of snow may see snow in the early part of January.
And the areas in the Mid-Atlantic and in the interior Southeast that got the big snowstorm back a few weeks ago, that might be the benchmark for the winter. That's going to be awfully hard to take out in terms of some of the numbers that were produced. But that being said, that doesn't mean that there won't be additional snow opportunities along the way.
Now, Robin
Begloss, I think.
Bejois?
Begloss or Begloss.
Okay. She's saying, should we put snow tires on all fours? Do people still have snow?
Well, I was thinking exactly the same thing. I thought if you had radials, there are some people that do actually have. I've talked to a few people here who do the snow tire thing. I haven't done snow tires since the late '80s.
Right.
Just left the radials on with a four-wheel drive.
There's a tire called BlizzTech, I think, which is specifically made. But to put BlizzTechs on your car would. I could see doing that, let's say, if you live in Buffalo or Rochester or whatever. But here in the tri-state area, I don't know. I don't think it really would be necessary. But
Robert Hurley. So I'm going to bring up the map, and I'm going to show you why that may not be the case. But the high in Canada is going to block the extreme cold air from the second polar vortex. Am I right on this? Okay, so let me illustrate this. First of all, you got just remember that what you're seeing up there at that level of the atmosphere does not necessarily translate directly down here. In other words, where you see the highs and where you see the lows are not going to correspond to the same thing. So I'll bring the map up again.
Back up for a second.
Sure. Which one?
Back
to the board?
Back to the chat.
Okay.
I wanted to see this.
All right. Andrew. Okay, so just so you know, and if anybody's new on the board, we don't do politics here. We don't do weather manipulation. We don't do, flat Earth. We don't do geoengineering. We don't do any of that stuff. If you want to talk about that stuff, just take it elsewhere. It doesn't work here, okay? Just so you know. All right, so anyhow, we're looking at the upper air, okay? So, again, at this, way up there, we're up in the stratosphere. So when you're seeing it like this, if we use your argument, okay, what you're saying, in the situation right now, you would think that we would be very cold because the flow around the low across Canada would be west-northwest, and it looks like that it's cold here in the east. But again, it doesn't translate directly. Actually, what this flow does is it traps all the real cold air. Where you see the darkest blues, all the Arctic air is just basically locked up up in the Arctic regions. You have to open it up by weakening the polar vortex in the stratosphere. It's sort of the opposite of what you'd see in the bottom of the atmosphere. If you're near the strengthening polar vortex, you're going to wind up in the flow. You don't even have to be near the polar vortex in order to get into the cold air if you're in the bottom of the atmosphere. But this is what it evolves into. And if you follow the flow at that level, it would drive systems from, across the pole and then turn it. And again, I might be off here, but it would suggest to me that you would see the flow of polar air toward Greenland and then into the eastern part of North America. And this sort of situation would set up for blocking. It would also mean that you'd have a ridge in the west because you see the upper high. Now hold that image of that map, and I'm going to go to the same time frame. And we're going to go down to the 500 millibar level, which is the middle of the atmosphere. Okay, so notice the difference here. This is for January 5th, which is roughly the same time frame of the upper air you just looked at. So we have this in the stratosphere, okay? This is what we have in the stratosphere. So you've got an upper high over most of Canada, a weak polar vortex, or with a remnant vortex that drops down into the northeast, and then a stronger vortex up in Europe. But when you look at this at the 500 millibar level, you've got a wrapped up vortex in eastern Canada. And look at the polar flow here that comes from just west of Greenland, around that upper low into the northeast. So if you look at this closely, Robert, you can see that how that mid-level of the atmosphere translates to that stratosphere. Okay, and it makes sense. And also with the higher pressures and heights across the poles, you do have, and over Greenland, you do have. It's not blocky, but the NAO is probably neutral to somewhat negative here. Although the whole vortex looks like it wants to hold in, and now you even start to see some blocking developing as you get toward about January 10th or 11th.
You may also see in this type of excuse me, in this type of pattern, we may see as we move into January a plethora of Alberta Clipper type storms, which may, if they pass to our north, of course, they usually don't do much damage here. But if we can get a couple of them to pass just off to our south, sometimes they tend to wind up and redevelop, let's say off the South Jersey or the Delmarva Peninsula, and suddenly turn into 2 to 4 or 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 inch snowmakers for our area too. So it's not
we can even look at the surface. We can see the whole, the transition from the top, the middle, and the bottom here of what happens. So here's your Sunday night. This is the 18Z parallel GFS, which it still keeps bringing this thing up. It has a slightly warmer look. Looks like, it has the rain snow line a little further north, but it still has a fairly decent low that comes out, unlike the GFS. Then here comes an Arctic boundary approaching with another wave for New Year's Day with a little bit of rain. And it still kind of hangs that front along the East Coast later next week. And then here comes a push of cold Arctic air into the Northeast.
Right.
Then another high builds in an ocean storm that develops. And then another big high comes in at the last, and then yet another one toward the end of the period. Right. So we're going to start to see shots of cold air coming in one after another. And of course, all of this is going to evolve. I wouldn't look at this, and I think you would agree with me, Joe, I wouldn't look at this in any way, shape, or form and say after, day 7 or 8, that we're going to come in and see the same thing on the next run or the run after.
Things are moving too fast. And even though we have supercomputers working on the computations and doing far better than, let's say, some man-made attempt at looking at all of this, even with the supercomputers, the flow is just too fast, and things literally will change for a specific time frame over a span of just a day or two. So, yeah, the further out you go, the more tenuous the projections and the accuracy you're going to get.
So, Nick Cortez, I don't know. I am not a long-range person. I have told you that 100 times, and I'm going to say it again for those of you who don't know. I'm not into the long range beyond what the models are doing. I don't. I just don't do it. Okay, and you're wasting time asking me because I'm not going to do it. I'm just kind of focused on the next couple of weeks. The next couple of weeks say that we are going to get into a wintry pattern, and there's going to be a little volatility in that, and that's it. So after that, you don't know, I don't know. I don't think nobody really knows how that all plays out. Would you not agree?
I used to listen, by the way, to a radio station out in Fort Collins, Colorado, WWV. It's usually utilized just for giving the accurate time. In fact, our atomic clocks, those atomic clocks on your wrist or on the wall in your home, they come out of Fort Collins, the atomic clock out there. But on the radio station, sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time, at specific times, like I think 10 after or 18 after the hour, they give what are called geo alerts. And I remember from going way back in the 80s, sometimes on rare occasions they would issue a stratwarm alert, stratospheric warming. And you talk about long-range forecasters. There was a guy who used to do long-range forecasts in the New York area on radio, WCBS, Gordon Barnes. And Gordon Barnes, whenever I heard the stratwarm alert, Gordon Barnes would go on WCBS radio and say, I do believe we're going to be getting into a much colder weather pattern in the next couple of weeks due to a change in the upper levels, the stratosphere or whatever. He was the first person I ever heard who made reference to that. And now we're going back, what, almost like 40 years.
Yeah, and that was very rare, though. He was
Yeah.
really one of the few people that was doing that sort of thing.
Right.
Johnny Quest, because you asked, I have given it to you. By the way, let me just really quick thank you. Steve LaPointe, Cash082, Nick Cortez, Brandon Doherty. Thanks so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it greatly. Gets me a couple of cigars on the drive home.
Yeah.
So I just to come back to the short range, Joe. We've got Johnny Quest, who's about to go over the 100-inch mark. With if he gets that rain for Friday, and then if he gets any more precip come Sunday, the 7-day SPC forecast for your neck of the woods is for at least 2 to 4, and it's giving up to about a couple of inches for us. I think that's pretty fair. You're getting 4 or 5 inch amounts through the Gulf states and in parts of northern Georgia and in western North Carolina. A lot of that may be convective, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some strong thunderstorms move through here as this whole storm system translates eastward. The poor guy, he's going to need a canoe. Well, you already got the canoe. I think you're going to need something even bigger. We'll maybe you might want to get like a 20 or 30 footer.
Well, why don't you just go online and see what the dimensions were of Noah's Ark?
Yes, exactly. Carl White says Gordon Barnes was from the Bahamas. He was on just before Bob Harris on WCBS radio, as I remember quite well.
Right, and there was a gentleman before Gordon Barnes on CBS television, a gentleman by the name of Harry Geiss, and Harry Geiss also was in the long-range community. He liked to forecast. In fact, somebody who does the weather on WHUD radio, Jim Witt, says that Harry Geiss, the guy who got him into long range, because Harry Geiss supposedly back in the summer of 1966 stuck his neck out and said that we were going to have a big snowstorm on Christmas Eve 1966, and we did get it. I don't know how he ended up doing that and making the prediction, but it was Jim Witt who approached Harry Geiss and said, "How did you do this?" And apparently Harry Geiss told him the basics. Then Geiss left, and Gordon Barnes came along, and Barnes was around from the mid-'60s and late '60s to the early '70s. You're absolutely right. Bob Harris, who was on WOR radio, took over for Gordon Barnes when Gordon Barnes left to go to Washington, D.C., WTOP. I remember all of these things.
No, I know.
Or whatever. But, but for a long time, Gordon Barnes was on. He used to tell, at the beginning of each month, he would reveal to everybody what he thought the days of the upcoming month would be for possible storms and snow or whatever like that. He'd literally tell, I think it was Lou Adler, and whoever was working with Lou Adler at the time, he'd say, "Get your crayon out, here we go. January 1st, January 3 to 5th, January 10th, all these were the supposed storm days."
And then we snow lovers would write these things down when we were young, and they, 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen.
And we'd be so disappointed. It's just, this is why I can't get wrapped up, and I long cease to even. I like to read about it every once in a while. It's kind of interesting. I know some people might find it more interesting than I do. I guess the concept, Joe, for me is what the obsession of knowing about stuff 3, 6, 9 months in advance. I mean, unless you're a farmer, unless you're an oil trader, unless you're a heating oil trader, unless you're a gas trader, or you use futures to hedge, your business, where that sort of information or to have a leg up on something of a general long range trend is going to give you, an advantage. I mean, it's not like I'm going to sell my house and move because we're going to have a colder than normal winter or a warmer than normal winter or anything in between.
Well,
I understand the weather interest because everybody's.
Yeah.
I think what it is I think everybody's grasping for that. What it boils down to is they want that big snowstorm, and they want to know that during a certain time frame in a given season that it's going to be cold enough for that to happen. So they're constantly asking that question, and I think it's far more fun and exciting and more of a much better learning process watching this stuff evolve, because like you and I are always learning new things when we see these weather patterns, how they've evolved over the years, and how we've been burned, how we have been burned forecast wise, where you get it. The way it works in weather is kind of like how the stock market works. Once you figure out a pattern, it's usually when that pattern is about halfway through. So then you keep using that logic, the trend is your friend, and it'll carry you so far until the trend breaks. And the question is whether you figure that when the break point will come, and most often times than not, you don't. So when that break happens, you get burned.
Well, who 2 days ago would have forecast, if you were a financial consultant or whatever, who a couple of 3 days ago would have forecast 1,000+ rise in the Dow Jones today? You? You really would?
I had this conversation from late last week that there was going to be a really ridiculous snapback rally because of the deep sell-off. It was only it was stretched. The rubber band was stretched as far as you could stretch it.
This wasn't a snapback. This was a whiplash.
Well, and in bear markets, that's what you get.
Yep.
So you get everything here, folks.
Yeah.
You get stock market analysis, and you also get how to cook prime rib and lobster tails, and if it's in the summer, we'll do ribs and other things. And you get the best trivia, right? You and I can probably rattle off more TV shows. And we try, in the middle of all of that, we give you a little bit of weather, which is a good thing. So any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Well, no, I think we've fairly well covered it, and we probably will recover it again in about an hour and 15 minutes on Facebook.
Right, so we'll be on our Facebook show, the Joe and Joe Weather Show, on Facebook, and that will be roughly at about 9:15 or 9:20. It's a little harder for us to time because we try to, we have a few things to do in between. So figure about 9:20 on Facebook if you are on Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. So by all means, join us in. We will go over some of the same stuff, but we'll probably have some new things to look at, and maybe the NAM
will be out.
The NAM will be out. Yeah. The NAM will take us into Sunday morning, so at least we'll have an idea of what it looks like for Sunday morning. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Nope. All right, so let me just remind everybody, for those of you who really want to extend their weather experience, you can join my expanded weather platform on Patreon. I put the link up on the chat here. It's a subscription platform. It's just $2 a month. And we have live streams that are just for Patreon members, although in the last week that's been a difficult thing to do, but we're going to get them back to normal. Posts without ads, posts for Patreon members that are not on my website, Meteorologist Joe, my website, meteorologistjoecioffi.com. We're talking for an hour. I'm starting to get confused. So check that out. Also, if you're on Google Play, let me just leave you with the link to my app. And we're going to be doing updates on the Google Play portion of this soon, and the iPhone version, making that submission. So we're waiting for Apple. So here it is on Google Play. This is absolutely free. And in the event that you got some Amazon gift cards to spend and use, let me just leave you with my Amazon link. Joe is leaving us right now. Thanks for being on tonight, Joe.
No
really
problem.
appreciate it. Okay. So here's my Amazon link there. If you shop on Amazon, you get your stuff, and Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin out of their pocket, so I get a couple of cigars out of it. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. Thanks again for those of you who hit Super Chat tonight. Cash 082, Steve LaPointe, Nick Cortese 3 times, and Brandon Doherty. Thank you very much for doing that. It goes a long way. It gets me a cup of coffee, gets me a hot chocolate, gets me a cigar, and I'm a very happy guy. Okay, Facebook at 9:20. Patreon guys, you'll get your stuff tomorrow, and we'll be back here tomorrow night at 7 o'clock with our regular YouTube live stream. Good night, everybody. 30 seconds shy of 60 minutes.